Hey, welcome to episode number 11 of the Go-To Physio podcast. In today's episode, we're talking all about deadlift and the importance of foot pressures. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey, welcome to episode number 11 of the Go-To Physio podcast. My name is Dave O'Sullivan and thank you for joining me for another episode. Now, in today's episode, we're going to go back into clinical applications, and one of the most important lifts that us as therapists need to be proficient at, in my opinion, whether that's a sports physio or whether that's a therapist working in private practice and treats a lot of back pain patients especially, is the deadlift. Now, the deadlift, it's a movement that everybody does some variation of a deadlift throughout a day, and it's also the movement that a lot of people would have apprehension of doing, especially back pain patients. Flip that into the sporting world, professional sport world. The deadlift, it's a movement that we as therapists sometimes will actually see issues in the gym being caused from maybe deadlifting with movements that aren't as efficient as they could be. Okay, so it's a very, very important movement, and I think today's episode's important to maybe reflect on that deadlift movement and how we can integrate this into the real world population and also help our athletes be even better. So, you know, whether I'm talking about a professional athlete or whether I'm talking about a non-sporting patient, you know, the principles that we're going to cover here today would hold true for either or. Okay, so the deadlift foot pressures, I think, is very, very important. I think there's not enough time being spent appreciating the importance of foot pressures. Now, when I was studying, 10, 11 years ago for my UKSCA exams at the time, we were looking at, we'd learn off by heart the Olympic lifting pressures of the foot. Okay, so at the first pull, the second pull, where was the pressure of the foot? And what's really, really interesting is the vast majority of strength and conditioning coaches that I come across now, they're all obsessed with pushing through the heels. Okay, and whether we're squatting or deadlifting, again, the same principles I think very much hold true here, and that is there's a whole lot of cueing to push through the heels to activate the glutes. Okay, again, I'm not aware of any studies that show that you push through the heels, you're going to activate the glutes more so than pushing through other parts of the foot. Okay, and we'll talk a lot about that in a second, but I'm not quite sure where the obsession with the heels came from. I think it was kind of coming from the back end of maybe the mid 2000s, when people were starting to get a bit more obsessed with this vertical shin angle, okay, rather than letting the knees actually go over the toes. So what we see a lot of issues with the deadlift is that a lot of people, when they push through their heels, they're pushing through their heels and they're trying to extend the hip at the same time. Okay, now we look at the foot pressures of the Olympic lift, but not only that, we look at the foot pressures of Gait. Okay, and what you'll notice is that when the hip extends, the pressure going through the foot is going on to midfoot towards forefoot as the hip extends. The weight going through the heel at heel strike is when your hip is usually in maximal flexion. Okay, whereas when we're hip extending, the weight is going to go through from the heel onto the midfoot, onto the forefoot, onto toe off a maximal hip extension. Okay, if we look at Olympic lifting at the start of the second pull, okay, where we need complete movement efficiency, okay, and these Olympic weightlifters will achieve that day in, day out, setting massive records compared to the weight they're pulling overhead compared to their body weight, etc. That is movement efficiency in my eyes. And if you look at that, where the pressure is on the foot, just as they're about to get that second pull, a lot of it's going through the midfoot. Okay, so the big issue for me is the cueing of people pushing through the heels. I think is a very, very bad cue. Okay, so don't get me wrong, when we go into hip flexion, I've got no issues with the weight coming towards the heels. But when we get into hip extension, or we're hip extending from a flex state, we need that foot pressure to go from the heel onto the midfoot, onto the forefoot. Now, the nice thing about that is we're getting a lot of tissues contributing a little bit more. So as we go from the heel, if you're trying to push through the heel, okay, and you sit down on your chair now and you push through the heel, one of the first things you're going to notice is as you push through the heel is you're almost getting a reaction of ankle dorsiflexion, okay, as you push through that heel. So if we're trying to ankle dorsiflex while hip extending, you think about you're trying to walk with your heel, and you're trying to pull, almost scrape with your heel, scraping your hip through, your toes will almost come up. So that to me isn't a good strategy, okay? What we want to happen when we start to hip extend is we want plantar flexion, okay? If we plantar flex, what we're going to get there is we're going to get soleus anyway as a very important plantar flexor, okay? We're going to get the gastro and the hamstring to delay knee extension, okay, so the knee doesn't snap back, so that we can get the hip to do work, okay? And again, please listen to my previous episodes on that. I wouldn't say I'm getting tired of it now, but I've covered this in a lot of detail, and I don't want to spend too much additional time on that. So again, the point being, if we're not plantar flex, if we're not pushing through the midfoot, we're not getting as much distal hamstring proximal gastro to co-contract with the knee joint. And what we tend to see, or what I tend to see clinically in both professional sport and private practice, is the knee will snap back, okay? And that's what I see a lot of athletes doing when they're deadlifting, is the weight shifts or stays on the heel as they're coming up and the hip extending. The weight's on the heel, so what they're going to try to do to keep their base of support over the heel is they'll snap their knees back. Hey, I hope you're enjoying today's show. For more clinical content and tips to help you implement this content in the real world, please visit thegotofysio.com for more information, including my 6-step patient adherence checklist, which you can download for free. And also there's more blog content that helps you implement this stuff in the real world. You'll also find links to my YouTube show, the Go To Physio Show, as well as lots of more information to help you become the go-to therapist, helping real patients get real results in the real world. Okay, when they snap their knee back, you're getting passive hip extension, the glutes are doing very, very little, and then the next thing to happen is they'll hyperextend their low back to keep their center of gravity somewhere around that heel, okay? Now, we can shift that, okay, and we can encourage the person to use the full foot, because when we use the full foot, what we're actually creating is movement variability, movement options, but we're also challenging the person's base of support, okay? So we're putting obviously external load on here. We're going to challenge their base of support by utilizing the full foot, okay? And that's what we want to do ideally, is we want their base of support to be between the big toe and the heel, okay? We don't want their base of support to essentially be the heel, okay? You're going to feel more stable, you're going to have more balance, you're going to be able to distribute this weight well throughout the limb, okay? And that's what we're trying to do when we deadlift, is we're trying to get the calf, the hamstring, the quads, the glutes, the erector spinae, the intercostals, the triceps, the biceps, the forearm flexors, the fingertips. We're trying to get everything to distribute that load, okay? And that's an issue that I see happen a lot of times. A lot of people are picking stuff up that don't distribute the load evenly through the whole body, and usually iliocostalis, it attaches from the rib cage to the thoracolumbar fascia, massive tendons, okay, transferring energy, okay. What do we see? We see, in inverted commas, QL going into spasm. Everyone blames the QL. If you actually look at the anatomy, I personally think that a lot of people, what they're seeing is they're getting a lot of protective tone around the iliocostalis. I think the QL is a lot deeper than that, but that's probably a discussion for another day, okay? Whereas what we want to do is we want that iliocostalis to communicate with the hip. We want the iliocostalis to communicate with the intercostals, communicate with the upper limb, the lower limb. We want everything to distribute that load to give them, the person, movement variability and movement options. And that's the big thing that we need at the end, especially at the end of our rehab with low back pain patients, is to give them the confidence to thrive, lift heavy things, but not only lift heavy things with movement variability and an ability to distribute that load evenly throughout the whole body. Okay, and that's the value for me of being very, very anal about the foot pressures. Okay, if I go into a gym and I want to see if an athlete's moving well, I'll just look at their foot. Okay, and if they're using the full foot throughout the lift, ideally hip flexion, it goes towards the heel, hip extension, it goes towards midfoot, forefoot, and that's an athlete or a patient that's demonstrating good movement variability to me, and it's somebody that's got movement options. You see someone move with back pain or something like that, they're usually on one part of the foot, they're rigid, the rib cages are moving very well, which will have massive reactions above and below. Okay, so that's something to consider this week. It's a short episode, but there's hopefully a lot of stuff in there that you can take and you can apply clinically. The big thing for me that I'd love for you to take and apply clinically is, number one, when you're looking at your patient actually lift something up, have a look at their foot. When they do a sit to stand, look at their foot. Okay, look at where the foot pressures are, and especially back pain patients, where's the foot pressures? When the hip's going into flexion, where's the pressure in the foot? When the hip's going into extension, where's the pressure in the foot? I'm not against the heel. Okay, I'm not against the toes, I'm not against the midfoot. What I want the person to do is I want to use them all throughout the lift, to have that variance of movement and to have that ability to distribute that load well throughout the whole limb. Okay, so have a look at that, see the difference, do a sit to stand, push through the heels, sit to stand, push through the midfoot, forefoot as if you're about to squash an orange or something like that. As you sit to stand, you'll see that the hip joint's going to go is going to react differently, and your body will move in a slightly different direction. You get a lot more horizontal force production there as well. And again, we look at the planes of the glute, we can see that the glutes fibers are primed for that horizontal force production, not vertical. Quads, etc., low back, they're going to be doing a lot of vertical force production from my experience clinically. Okay, so that's it this week. For the accompanying video to this, to see some demos of this, please head over to www.thegotofysio.com/blog. You'll see the blog post, you'll see the cheat sheets. You can have my patient adherence checklist as well. That's a free download there. There's also information on my book, The Go-To Physio, and also information about the Go-To Therapist mentorship if you have any interest in learning more about this way, looking at the body, and you'd like to learn the step-by-step system that I use with professional athletes, and also that we use in my own clinic and in Huddersfield in private practice. Okay, so head over to www.thegotofysio.com/blog, and I'll see you over there with lots more great content. Once again, I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us this week. Short, sharp, to the point episode, but a lot of clinical information there to apply. So it might be worth maybe listening to this a couple of times. Any questions, feel free to get in touch, and I'll see you on the next episode. Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's show. For more information, please visit www.thegotofysio.com, where you can download my 6-step patient adherence checklist absolutely free, as well as read the accompanying blog that goes with today's episode. We've got lots of cheat sheets and clinical content to help you implement to get real world results with real patients, that ultimately helps you become the go-to therapist and allows you to build a profitable, busy private practice, or become that go-to therapist in professional sport. I'll speak to you soon on the next episode.